Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to span the range of the 22nd through the 37th verse of Matthew's 12th chapter. And in the opening verses of the chapter, we read that the disciples are on the Sabbath day, the disciples of Yahshua, that is, are picking grains through field. And this was permitted by the Mosaic law in Deuteronomy, but the Pharisees had since added 39, a list of things one could and could not do on the Sabbath, and that was in violation of their tradition. It wasn't in violation of the law or the word. And so that provokes a controversy, and the Son establishes his supremacy over the Sabbath. And to demonstrate that fact, he heals a man who, with a withered hand, who is in the synagogue on the Sabbath day, as to make a point that the work of the Father does not cease on the Sabbath, but it is enhanced and it goes forward. These activities are not forbidden, they're not inconsistent with the will of the Father, and he exposes their hypocrisy by analogy of them seeing one of their sheep or farm animals' leg caught in a ditch, which one of them would not step out and rescue them, forgetting all decorum of the Sabbath. And here is a human who is of inestimably more value than a farm animal in need of his healing touch, and his healing touch is there. Providence had brought him to him at this moment in time, and he does it, and this really upsets the Pharisees. They conspire to kill him, and he becomes privy to this and withdraws, and even though he withdraws, he still attracts large crowds who gather to be healed from them, thus fulfilling prophecy of Isaiah. And then we read he's in a new location in the 22nd verse. Then they brought him to one who was demon-possessed, blind and dumb, and he healed him, so that the blind and dumb man both spoke and saw. The they would have been the congregation at this, or the crowd that was gathered around them. We can plausibly assume that it was a congregation, as Pharisees were present. These are the local authorities at the synagogue level, where their authority generally remained uncontested. But this man was rendered blind and dumb. He couldn't see, he couldn't speak, because he was possessed by a demon. And once the exorcism is successfully executed, his sight and his speech are restored. And demon possession we read of a lot of encounters of demon possessions, and the expulsion of demons from demon-possessed people is known as exorcism. So we do read a lot of examples of exorcisms in the Gospels, and a lot of us think it's an antiquated and bygone thing, but demon possession is on the rise in our age, and the deception is even greater because you don't need to know. Satan has appears in a variety of forms. He masquerades as an angel of light. He slithers in as a serpent, and he's also a roaring lion. So he does not limit himself to one presentation. And with all our mass media, pop culture, saturated culture, he is in more places and more forms than ever. And he has this entire society vexed, many of whom are demon-possessed, if not seduced or controlled. And all the crowds were amazed and said, "Is this the Son of David?" Son of David would have been a messianic title. It was an established fact that the Jewish Messiah would descend from the stock of David, but the Judean throne was no longer in operation, so it wasn't as easy to prove that he was in fact his descendant. They thought he was a native of Nazareth when he was born at this was some of the common confusion when he was born at Bethlehem, and had had Judah not been conquered and subsumed by the Babylonians, this humble carpenter father would be seated on the throne in Jerusalem, and he would be the one to inherit it, but they were at the thumb of the Romans at this time. But when the Pharisees heard it, they said, "This one does not cast out demons except by Beelzebub, the ruler of the demons." The Pharisees would have been they did not start off as terrible people. They had well-intentioned in their origins. They emerged in response to the Hellenization of when the Greeks conquered under Alexander the Great. They not only conquered the land and plundered it, but they also transplanted their culture. And this was creeping into and influencing and impacting negatively the followers of Yahweh. So a certain sect amongst them, Pharisees literally translates as separate. They said they were going to keep themselves separate of all that, separate of all the contaminating influences. And the Romans, who had exchanged the Greeks at this time, were not similar conquerors. They did not necessarily impose their culture to the extent that the Greeks did. The Greeks, we read, slaughtered pigs to Zeus, Antinaphes the fourth, and we read of that in the Maccabees, and that's the abomination of Daniel. But more to the point of the passage, they at this time they became self-righteous, because after a certain point the Pharisees started taking it upon themselves to add additional laws without authorization or inspiration to the laws of Moses, which prohibited one from, as the disciples did in the opening verse, they gleaned a field on the Sabbath day. They had all these rules, and they became self-righteous because it became, it elevated almost into a species of self-worship. And then this itinerant preacher from Galilee comes along. He's upsetting the status quo wherever he goes. He's a troublemaker. And so the reason they did not believe in him is because they did not want to believe in him. Belief is a matter of choice, and they did not want this man to be the Messiah because their position were threatened by him if he was. And they had seen the miracles. They knew it was a miracle. They had just witnessed it. They knew that it was by not a human power that this demon could be expelled or exorcised, so they attribute it to Satan. Beelzebub has roots in Baal, who is one of the forms. Remember, Satan doesn't limit himself to a single puppet, but Baal was the god of the Philistines, and that is one of the ways. That is one form or manifestation of Satan. But since then, it had become translated. That's its etymological root as the lord of the house or temple or the demons. And Yahshua knew their thoughts and said to him, "Every kingdom divided against itself is laid waste, and every city or house divided itself shall not stand." So they didn't necessarily say this out loud, or at least within earshot, but we read that he knew their thoughts, so he knew what was on their mind. He didn't necessarily need to be told what they had said out loud within earshot of himself, and he tells them that Satan... It is an illogical and impractical act of self-sabotage for Satan to cast out his own minions by his own power. Your argument is a logical fallacy. You've got to be kidding me. This is ridiculous. This is done by the hand of the Almighty and not by any... Satan would never attack his own. He certainly betrays all his own, but it's not in his short-term interest to expel demons from demon-possessed people. And if Satan cast out Satan, he is divided against himself. How then does his kingdom stand? Satan is not stupid. He recognizes the imperative of having as united a front in the war of good against evil. He is the author and the general of the sides of evil, but he does not do anything to divide his effectiveness or his power. So, and if I by Beelzebub cast out demons, by whom do your sons cast them out? Because of this they shall be your judges. So he's saying, I just did something you didn't do. There was a man in need, he was demon-possessed, and none of you people could do what I just did, and now you're degrading me and smearing me as a satanic wizard of sorts, but it's really rooted in envy because you didn't have the faith or the power to do what I just did. But if I cast out demons by the spirit of Elohim, then the kingdom of Elohim has come upon you. Now the spirit is significant. It's going to come up here in this passage is one of the places we read of the unpardonable sin of blasphemy against the Ruach Kodesh. We'll get to that when it gets to it. But the point that is established in this passage is that he had done this by the Spirit, the power of the Spirit, and the kingdom was in front of them in their midst, and they were denying it and rejecting it, and thereby forfeiting a place for their own seat in that blessed abode. Or how is one able to enter a strong man's house and plunder his goods, unless he first binds in the strong man, and then he shall plunder his house? So he's stating that his power is superior to that of the demons he cast out. Elsewhere we read that the demons tremble in his presence, and they know him by name, and they squeal and squirm when he is present in their midst. In the other exorcisms in encounters with demon-possessed people that we read about throughout the gospel. So he is clearly the superior power. The demons believe in Elohim, that he is one, and they tremble because they are an inferior qualitative beings. They cannot match or equal the power of divinity. The demonic can never do that over the divine. He who is not with me is against me, and he who does not gather with me scatters abroad. I like to connect this verse with the Old Testament Proverbs 18:9. He who is idle is a brother to him who destroys. And one of Satan's lies is that you can be neutral about Yahshua. You can sit on the sidelines for a while, but eventually you're going to hear it, and you're going to hear the call, and it's going to demand a statement of profession, because if you're not, once you come to an awareness of who he is, you don't have the luxury or the option of remaining neutral as you did before. You cannot sit on the sidelines when you contemplate his character and come to an awareness of who he is. And many people try and remain neutral. They don't like to say that he is a liar. When they hear him call himself the Son of God, a lot of people envision him as a great human moral teacher, but not the Son of Divinity. And so they never quite call him a liar, but they imply that he is by disagreeing with his terms. And a lot of people like to say, I'm not against you Christians saying he's the only way. It's just not the only way for me. And he tells us, he draws the line in the sand clear. There's no circumventing it. There's no bypassing. There's no clever way to weasel your way around it. I die on the cross for your behalf, and you either accept it or you don't. Because of this, I say to you, all sin and blasphemy shall be forgiven men, but the blasphemy against the Spirit shall not be forgiven men. So he's permitting, he knows he's going to be blasphemed against in the course of his ministry. People are going to reject his claim to be deity. He knows that, and he says they can be forgiven because it is a mysterious. Prior to the resurrection, there was no proof that he was in fact divine. He had the form and characteristics of the human flesh and all our physical features in our bodies, but there was no way to know that he was divine except by faith, at least prior to the resurrection. And so he knew it would be forgiven. His own So the Pharisees were blaspheming against him right now. He's telling them it didn't seal their doom. They still had a chance to repent. And his own brothers didn't believe him until the resurrection, but then they became ardent apologists. But once the protagonist of Genesis through Revelation is Yahweh, is the divine protagonist from Genesis to Malachi. Then the Son becomes the divine protagonist in the Gospels. In Acts to Revelation, the Spirit becomes the divine protagonist. So once after he's dead and they see the apostles working wonders through the Spirit, there's going to be no form left of Elohim for them to dispute. They will have run out of all options. They will have exhausted every form of blasphemy, and they will not be forgiven. either make the tree good and its fruit good, or else make the tree rotten and its fruit rotten. For a tree is known by his fruits. This incidentally echoes or parallels or overlaps with the standards by which we are to tell false from authentic sheep or shepherds. There's going to be wolves in sheep's clothing, we're warned about in Matthew's 7th chapter. But by their fruit we will know the quality of their teachers. Heretics, those who are doctrinally deficient, cannot produce good works because perverted action is almost always rooted in corrupt doctrine. So he's admonishing his audience, Pharisees, and the people, the people who had gathered around him, the one who had brought the demon-possessed one to him. He's telling them that he's admonishing them to think positive, be the best version of yourself you can, and let your character show by your fruit, and let that be a witness and testimony of who you are in the Father. Brood of adders, how are you able to speak what is good, being wicked? For the mouth speaks from the overflow of the heart. In the 15th chapter, he expresses a parallel sentiment that the words are the mouth, are the reflections of the sentiments and intentions of the heart, but he's identifying them with snakes. That is satanic implicitly, because in the Garden of Eden he slithered as a serpent, who was the craftiest of beasts, we read. And how are they able to speak with authority about what is good, themselves being wicked? And they had a form of righteousness, but it was really hypocrisy. It was self-righteousness. They had no righteousness in themselves, because our own righteousness is likened as filthy rags by the prophet Isaiah before him who is without blemish, in the 64th chapter in 6th verse of the book of Isaiah. The good man brings fruit from what is good, from the good treasures of his heart, and the wicked man brings forth what is wicked from the wicked treasure. So what we produce is what we have to offer. If we yield rotten or good fruit, that is what we make available to others. And as humans living in communal environments, we should bestow those we interact with the best that we have to offer. We should not sell them short or sell ourselves short. We should endeavor to be the best person we can, not only for our own sakes, but for those who we coexist with and interact with. And I say to you that for every idle word men speak, they shall give an account of it in the day of judgment. Now, the application for its immediate audience, those to whom these words were addressed, the Pharisees, it was an idle word for them to attribute the power through which he performed the exorcism that they themselves could not to Beelzebub or Satan. That was an idle word, which means a meaningless or pointless or just no constructive value is the Greek translation of the word idle. And they're going to have to answer it for it one day. So the opportunity, the window to repent it still hasn't shut. They have the rest of their lives to repent, and but if they don't, they're going to be judged by the words they proclaimed. And this has an application, a wider application to all of us. Every foul, dirty, vulgar thing we utter in private conversation will be remembered and taken into our account and determine on which side we stand at the judgment. For by your words you shall be justified, and by your words you shall be declared unrighteous. So our words are an accurate indicator of our character. If we speak positive thoughts and give constructive input, then we will be justified. That means declared innocent at the judgment, but we will be declared wicked and unrighteous and be condemned if our words, which have power to them in disciplining our tongue, is likened to a beast that no man has ever been able to discipline by James in the 3rd chapter. But what comes after this is the sign of Jonah, and I did one on that. You can type in Corey Johnston, the sign of Jonah. I do it in reverse order. I start with Luke 11, then Matthew 16:4, than John 28:39 through 45. But that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.